Silent Hill 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I love talking about it. I have so many great memories with this game, actually with all 4 of the Team Silent games. Like many of you, I love to come up with theories and share my interpretations of the game. Sharing them is part of why I love this game so much, and with the remake around the corner, I thought it would be fun to share one of my personal theories about why James meets Eddie and Angela. Initially, I wrote this out like a standard video essay, but then I realized that's stupid and I just want to share my theory in a video that's about this long. Just as a warning, this is not a deep dive into the lore, I'm not super analyzing anything, and I don't read or watch interviews about authors' intentions. I don't really care about any of that. Everything here is my own personal interpretation that I've gotten from playing the game so many times over the years. So here we go. Please grab your pitchforks, I'm going to do my best to explain myself, and if I completely fail, then may Poseidon have mercy on my soul, as the Silent Hill community tears me to pieces and forever lumps me with the circumcision and mirror guys. Okay, here goes. The reason why James meets Eddie and Angela is because James is Eddie and Angela's pyramid head. Wait, let me explain. It may sound a bit crazy. Obviously, James isn't Pyramid Head. But in my opinion, his role in meeting them could carry a similar function. Similar, not the same. Throughout the game, James runs into 3 other people. I said people. Laura, Eddie, and Angela. We don't need Laura for this theory. We all know that James, Eddie, and Angela are walking their way through the abandoned Silent Hill town, facing their demons and coming to terms with their crimes. But one thing I always found myself confused by was, why do they meet? Like, why do they specifically meet each other? What's the point of Silent Hill calling out to them and placing them within another world that has them interacting with each other? It could just be a big old coincidence. But that's not very fun. Personally, I believe that Eddie and Angela have a meaning in James's story, but I'll get into that later. My problem is, what exactly do the other 2 get from meeting James? I don't believe either of them meet each other, so other than Eddie meeting Laura, James is the only person they run into. I thought about it for a long time, but it was only until a few years ago that I started to get ideas. Everybody has their own otherworld where they see things differently from each other. Because we only ever get a glimpse of what Eddie and Angela see, we don't know the full extent of their otherworld's differences. But of the differences, there is at least one unique feature to James's story. James has Pyramid Head. The other 2, from what we understand, don't have a sexy long tongue having Punisher there stalking them. They have no need for one. They're not looking for punishment, they're already feeling punished and are aware of their guilt and their crimes. Their monsters are reflections of their guilt and their fears. Their journey to hell is quite different from James's. But that doesn't mean they don't have something or someone there to challenge them in some way. Eddie and Angela exhibit a wide assortment of emotions and behaviors. While neither of them seem to be delusional, they're far from being well-adjusted people, which makes sense given their traumas and dejection from society. During the game, James comes off as rational, respectful, concerned, and caring towards them, something neither of them are likely used to. And here's where my theory comes into play. What better way to challenge them in the worldview they've developed than by having a run-in with someone who is, at least with them, earnest and trustworthy. Someone who's rational, caring, and capable. This, in many ways, is something that would no doubt send them for a loop. Angela's past is filled with one of the greatest betrayals someone could face. She's likely never felt safe, even in her own home. When James talks to her, she initially seems nervous, yet stable and in control. But as the game goes on, we see her start to be more honest with herself and her pain. She becomes distant and defensive, sometimes at the drop of a hat. This all happens towards James. James shows her compassion and concern, something that Angela has been sorely missing in her life. As a result, Angela accuses James of secretly wishing to harm her. When James tries to approach Angela, no matter how innocently, her instincts kick in and she readies herself to fight. Understandably so. If there was one kind of person she wouldn't feel safe to trust, it would likely be a man. After all, how could you honestly trust men if you've suffered nothing but pain at their hands? And not just any men, but men in her family. Honestly, her mother's a piece of shit too for saying she deserved it. This is why I call it one of the greatest betrayals someone could face. If there's anything that would send her feelings all over the place, it's being introduced to another man, but one that seems trustworthy, one who just happens to show up, seemingly out of nowhere when she's isolated and most vulnerable. I believe their final encounter showcases the end of her personal punishment. For a brief moment, she mistakes James for her mother. She snaps out of it and thanks James for helping her before accepting the fate she's chosen for herself. When James once again objects to her suicidal tendencies and tries to convince her that she didn't deserve what happened to her, she asks James, maybe sarcastically, maybe hopelessly, if he'll be there for her, something that James sadly denies, whether because of his devotion to Mary or because he knows that her wounds take much more than love to heal. So in the end, even after she finally seems to believe James isn't there to hurt her, she's let down again in knowing that he won't be there for her. Acceptance and protection within arm's reach, yet denied again. Ironic that the man who came to Angela's rescue, who appeared to be the most genuine with her, who tried to support and protect her, also happened to be a murderer. I feel like I could keep going on with examples and interpretations of how James is in some way a tormentor for Angela. Tormentors in quotes, by the way. But I want this video to be around this long. So, moving on. Eddie's situation is different, but I believe his need for James is quite similar. Eddie is a man who's used to feeling worthless and unwanted. He hates being bullied and has found himself wanting to fight back after years of what felt like unrelenting cruelty at the hands of his peers. Feeling isolated from the world and as though he's a complete waste of space, he finally snaps and takes matters into his own hands, killing a dog and shooting some football-playing dude in the knee. He runs away in fear. Just as he begins to realize his ultimate solution to bullying, which is murder, he meets James, who speaks to Eddie with a level of concern and treats him as an equal. Eddie seems very passive towards James, not even initially remembering his name despite meeting like an hour ago. Eddie tries to hide the fact that he's murdering. He's being careful around James, but he's a little too far gone to be too turned around by James's presence. That doesn't mean James doesn't give him anxiety. This is where I think James is there to challenge Eddie. My theory is that he's worried that James, who from the outside is very kind and patient with Eddie, is secretly judging and laughing at him. After years of isolation and bullying, it would be hard to trust anyone. Compared to the people Eddie has been killing in his delusions, James is real. He doesn't just let Eddie do whatever he wants without questioning him, and James isn't just going to sit back and let Eddie kill him. I would guess that reasoning with Eddie is a challenge for both parties, and a huge stress to Eddie, who wants nothing more than to convince James that he isn't doing anything wrong. I should point out, it isn't much of a theory that Eddie thinks James is making fun of him. He literally says it right to James in their final encounter. After questioning Eddie, he turns around and says,
"I knew it. You too. You're just like him, James."
Hey, I didn't mean anything.
Don't bother. I understand. You've been laughing at me all along, haven't you? Ever since we first met.
Now, it's possible that Eddie wasn't actually thinking this whole time, and his paranoia is just getting the better of him. Either way, it shows that Eddie has been having doubts towards James, no matter how patient James has been with him. Unlike Angela, there is another way that James could be there to torment Eddie. Remember that torment is in quotes. James isn't actually Pyramid Head. That's not what I'm saying. Another thing that Eddie said he was scared of was being caught for killing the dog and crippling that man, claiming that no one would ever forgive him. He seems to be hiding things from James and mostly wants to keep him out of his business, which makes things very complicated since James only shows up immediately after Eddie kills someone, or eats 2 whole boxes of pizza, that fat fuck. Of all the times that someone could show up, the worst time for Eddie would be right after he kills someone, or eats the pizzas. Ugh. He's caught in the act, the only person around while carrying a large revolver. After the first kill, Eddie is incredibly defensive. He even seems disgusted by his actions, given that he's throwing up for like 20 hours in the bathroom. But deep down, he's already loving the high of murdering. He just doesn't want to get caught while doing it. So in some ways, James could represent a figure of authority, or as someone there to catch Eddie in the act and bring him to justice, despite James wanting no part in Eddie's just desserts. I could probably do a bunch of additional research and draw comparisons, or do a deep dive on Eddie and Angela in relation to this theory I have, but I think that would take a lot of the fun out of it for me, so I'm just going to stop right there. To summarize, obviously James isn't roaming around the town looking to punish them or remind them of their sins, but I do think his presence adds a much deeper level of anxiety to their story. They're all isolated and wandering into the depths of themselves, and to come face to face with someone who could unknowingly represent the fears that you could have only adds to the trauma. Or maybe it can help bring you out of whatever it is you're going through. Before I end the video, I wanted to talk about one last thing. Earlier I said I have a theory as to why James meets Eddie and Angela, and what they mean for his story. Personally, I believe that James can see some of the victimization of Mary in the two of them. Both Eddie and Angela meet James at moments of weakness and vulnerability. They're both younger than him and seem much less stable, even though James is the delusional one. I believe he sees part of himself in both of them, but he also sees his situation with Mary in them. He was patient with Mary's illness for 3 years. Despite being seen as a less friendly person and having his moments of selfishness, he does seem to care for others' well-being and is committed to doing all that he can. But he's still trapped in a situation with two people whose conditions are terminal. People who yell at him, who lash out at him, who make him feel bad for helping them, and who push him. In one case, he's forced to kill. In the other, he has no choice but to sit there and let them go. Another reminder of what has transpired in his life. Again, this is just my interpretation. So that's my fun little fan theory as to why these characters meet. I have no idea if I got the message across, and again, I am not a Silent Hill wizard. This is just how I've interpreted the game's events and setting. I'm sure there are plenty of things that could be said to further prove or disprove it, but that's part of the fun, and I really welcome anybody to come talk about it. But anyway, pitchforks! It's just a fan theory! Curse you, Poseidon!